Disrespect has consequences, and in my courtroom, they're immediate. Judge Judy's voice cut through the stunned silence like a gavel strike, her words deliberate and final, each syllable landing with the weight of a judicial decree. The defendant, moments earlier smirking with misplaced confidence, now stood frozen under the courtroom's harsh fluorescent lights, her face draining of color like water from a broken glass. The gallery, packed wall to wall with spectators who come expecting routine small claims drama, erupted in gasps that echoed off the wood-paneled walls, sharp and involuntary, the sound of collective shock rippling through the rows of seats. Court officers stationed at the side doors straightened instinctively, their hands moving to their belts, their training kicking in as they assessed whether the situation might escalate beyond verbal confrontation. The bailiff, Petrie Hawkins Byrd, his face a mask of professional composure honed over decades at Judge Judy's side, allowed himself the slightest knowing glance toward the bench, a flicker of recognition that this moment would be replayed millions of times across social media. Camera operators positioned behind their bulky equipment exchanged wide-eyed looks, their expressions visible in the dim glow of viewfinder screens, their red recording lights blinking steadily like electronic heartbeats as they captured what would become one of the most viral courtroom moments in television history. The production booth, tucked behind soundproof glass at the back of the studio, buzzed with urgent whispers as directors and producers leaned into their monitors, fingers hovering over switches, headsets crackling with rapid-fire technical directions. "Hold on her face," one producer hissed into the mic, voice tight with the recognition that lightning had just struck. "Camera 2, tighten up. We need this reaction. But how did it come to this? What possessed a defendant, a 26-year-old woman with everything to lose and nothing to gain, to openly mock one of television's most formidable judges, a legal titan who'd presided over thousands of cases with an iron fist wrapped in judicial robes? And more importantly, how did Judge Judy Files, with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor and the authority of someone who'd spent decades on the bench before becoming a household name, dismantle her defiance so completely, so devastatingly, that the courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse? The answer lies not in the verdict itself, though that would prove crushing, but in the 30 seconds that preceded it. A collision of arrogance and authority, of youthful recklessness meeting immovable judicial force, that would teach a lesson far beyond the $3,000 in dispute. This wasn't just a court case about unpaid rent and property damage. It was a masterclass in consequences, delivered with surgical precision under the unforgiving glare of courtroom cameras that missed nothing, forgot nothing, and broadcast everything to an audience hungry for justice. The stage was set in Judge Judy Files' iconic courtroom, a space that millions of viewers across America and beyond recognize instantly, even in their sleep. The raised judge's bench, positioned center stage like a throne of justice, loomed over the plaintiff and defendant podiums below, creating a visual hierarchy that left no doubt about who held power in the space. Behind Judge Judy's imposing leather chair, the American flag hung motionless on one side, its stars and stripes a silent witness to the principles of law and order, while the state of California seal occupied the opposite wall, gold and blue and dignified. Overhead, industrial lighting panels, the kind used in television studios to eliminate every shadow, every hiding place, cast everything in sharp, unforgiving clarity. There was no soft glow here, no flattering angles. Every expression was readable, every bead of sweat visible, every micro-expression captured for posterity and viral consumption. The gallery stretched in neat rows behind the litigants, filled to capacity with audience members carefully selected during pre-production for their ability to react authentically. Raised eyebrows on cue, knowing nods at the right moments, shocked gasps that felt genuine because they were. Producers had briefed them during the pre-show meeting. Be reactive, be engaged, but let the drama breathe naturally. Don't force it. The story will tell itself. And they were right. Camera operators stood at 3 strategic angles, their positions marked on the floor with colored tape that had been measured and remeasured until the sight lines were perfect. Camera 1 captured the judge's perspective, looking down at the litigants from a slightly elevated position that mirrored Judge Judy's own view. Camera 2 focused exclusively on the defendants, ready to catch every flicker of emotion, every telltale sign of discomfort or defiance. Camera 3 roamed freely, a floating eye that could pivot to the gallery for reaction shots, zoom in on evidence photographs, or capture the bailiff's subtle responses to courtroom chaos. In the production booth just offset, behind thick glass that muffled but didn't completely silence the courtroom proceedings, directors and producers hunched over a wall of monitors, each screen showing a different angle, a different story. Their headsets crackled constantly with technical chatter. Audio check on podium 2. Adjust lighting on the bench. Stand by for entrance. Phones were silenced. Coffee cups sat forgotten, growing cold. Every crew member knew that when Judge Judy was in session, anything could happen. Pre-interviews with both parties had revealed warning signs. A defendant with an attitude problem the size of California, and a judge who had zero patience for disrespect, who'd built her entire brand on holding people accountable for their choices. The crew sensed this wouldn't be routine. Positions were checked. Equipment tested. The countdown began. At the plaintiff's podium stood Marcus Chen, a 47-year-old landlord from Burbank, his navy suit pressed to crisp perfection, his silk tie knotted with the kind of precision that suggested he'd watched YouTube tutorials multiple times before getting it right. His documents were organized in a leather folder, the expensive kind with brass corners that gleamed under the studio lights, tabs color-coded, pages laminated, everything arranged in chronological order like evidence at a murder trial. He'd appeared nervous during pre-production briefings earlier that morning, repeatedly asking production assistants what to expect, how to address the judge, whether he should bring extra copies of his photographs. "Just be honest and let Judge Judy guide you," they'd told him, offering reassuring smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes because they knew what was coming. His claim was straightforward, almost boring in its simplicity. $3,000 in unpaid rent and property damage from a tenant who'd broken her lease early, disappearing into the night and leaving destruction in her wake. Marcus had receipts, photographs, email chains, text message screenshots, everything a responsible landlord should have. He'd done his homework. During check-in, production staff had reviewed his evidence and nodded approvingly. "You're prepared," one had said. That's half the battle. Across from him, at the defendant's podium positioned exactly 6 feet away, measured precisely to fit both litigants in the same camera frame, stood 26-year-old Brianna Matthews. Her demeanor screamed defiance before she'd even opened her mouth. Arms crossed tightly over her chest. Weight shifted to one hip in a posture that body language experts would later dissect on legal commentary shows. Her expression oscillated between theatrical boredom and barely concealed contempt. She wore ripped jeans to court, not the fashionable kind with strategic tiers, but legitimately damaged denim that looked like it had survived a bar fight, and a graphic tee with faded lettering that the wardrobe department had flagged during check-in but ultimately allowed because, as one producer noted, it tells the story before she says a word. This was a calculated choice, a middle finger to courtroom decorum wrapped in the guise of casual Friday. Production assistants had noticed it immediately when she'd arrived at the studio that morning, 45 minutes late and unapologetic. "You might want to change," one PA had suggested gently, gesturing toward the business casual outfits other litigants wore. Brianna had rolled her eyes, an actual visible eye roll that several crew members witnessed and mentally filed away as a preview of coming attractions. "It's just TV," she'd muttered, loud enough for the boom microphones to catch during sound checks, her voice dripping with dismissiveness. "Not like it's real court." During pre-court preparation, when staff members explained basic courtroom etiquette, stand when the judge enters, address her as Your Honor, wait to be acknowledged before speaking, Brianna had scrolled through her phone, barely listening, her thumbs moving across the screen in rapid-fire texting patterns. When asked directly if she understood the rules, she'd shrugged and said, "Yeah, sure, whatever," without looking up. The production coordinator had exchanged a knowing glance with the legal assistant. They'd seen this type before, young, cocky, convinced that charm or attitude could substitute for accountability. The gallery sensed the tension before a single word was spoken. Spectators leaned forward in their seats slightly, their collective body language shifting from casual anticipation to focused attention. Reporters in the designated press section, yes, even small claims court drew media attention when Judge Judy Files presided. Her cases, often making headlines and trending on Twitter within minutes of airing, had their notepads ready, pens hovering above blank pages like conductors waiting for the orchestra to begin. Camera 2 zoomed slowly, almost predatorily on Brianna's face, the lens capturing the barely concealed smirk, playing at the corners of her lips, the kind of expression that said she thought this entire proceeding was beneath her, a waste of her valuable time. And then, cutting through the murmurs and shuffling papers and whispered conversations, the side door opened with a soft click that somehow commanded immediate attention. "All rise." Byrd's command cut through the murmurs like a whip crack, his baritone voice honed by years of courtroom authority, carrying to every corner of the studio with perfect clarity. The gallery stood in unison, the rustle of fabric and scraping of chairs momentarily drowning all other sound, a symphony of compliance that filled the space with ritualistic precision. Judge Judy Files emerged from her chambers, the door swinging wide to reveal her silhouette framed in the doorway like a figure from a classic western, small in stature but massive in presence. Her black robe flowed behind her as she moved, the fabric catching the air with each purposeful step. Her silver hair perfectly coiffed in her signature style, not a strand out of place. Her reading glasses hung from a delicate chain around her neck, glinting under the lights like a piece of judicial armor. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd presided over 12,000 cases, who'd built a television empire on the foundation of no-nonsense justice and razor-sharp legal instincts. Her footsteps echoed on the platform as she ascended to the bench, each step measured and deliberate, a metronome of authority. She didn't acknowledge the litigants yet, didn't even glance in their direction. Instead, her eyes remained fixed on the documents before her, already scanning the case file with the speed-reading efficiency of a former family court judge who'd learned to assess complex situations in seconds. The bailiff waited, his posture military straight, his hands clasped behind his back. The cameras held their positions, red lights blinking in synchronized rhythm with the production booth's master clock, and in that suspended moment before she spoke, the courtroom understood the fundamental truth of this space. This was Judge Judy's domain, her kingdom of accountability, and everyone else, litigants, gallery crew, was merely visiting, subject to her rules and her timeline. "Be seated," she said finally, her voice crisp and authoritative, carrying the weight of decades on the bench. The words weren't shouted or emphasized, simply stated as fact. The gallery complied immediately, lowering themselves into seats with synchronized efficiency. Marcus Chen sat down promptly, his posture respectful, his folder placed neatly on the podium before him. But Brianna took an extra beat. She sighed audibly, the sound picked up perfectly by the sensitive podium microphone, a theatrical exhale that seemed designed to communicate her annoyance at this entire process. She lowered herself with exaggerated slowness, her movements almost languid, as if sitting required extraordinary effort she was barely willing to expend. Camera 3 caught it perfectly. The delayed compliance, the visible reluctance, the body language that screamed disrespect. The production booth noted it, one producer whispering into her headset, "Did you see that? She's already starting." The director nodded, adjusting camera angles to ensure they wouldn't miss a moment of what was clearly going to be a confrontation. Judge Judy's eyes, sharp, dark, missing nothing, flicked up from her papers just long enough to register the disrespect. Her expression didn't change. She didn't scold or comment. She simply noted it, filing it away in the mental ledger she kept on every person who entered her courtroom. The pause lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, the battle lines were drawn with invisible ink that would become visible soon enough. She adjusted her glasses, peering down at the complaint form with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Chen," she began, her voice measured and professional, "you're suing Ms. Matthews for $3,000. Break it down for me." Marcus cleared his throat, unfolding a printed document from his folder with slightly trembling hands. "Your Honor, 2 months of unpaid rent at $1,200 each month, that's $2,400 total, plus $600 in damages to the apartment when she moved out early without providing proper notice as required by the lease agreement." Judge Judy nodded, her pen moving across her notepad in swift strokes. "You have documentation of these damages?" "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus held up a stack of photographs, their glossy surfaces catching the light. The images showed holes punched in drywall, carpet stained beyond recognition, a closet door hanging at an angle from broken hinges. He passed them to Byrd, who delivered them to the bench with ceremonial precision. In the gallery, spectators leaned forward instinctively, craning their necks to glimpse the photographs as they passed from hand to hand. Reporters in the press row scribbled frantically in their notepads. Property damage photos, holes in walls, broken door, their pens moving in rapid scratches across paper. The production booth director murmured into her headset, voice low but urgent, "Get tight on Judy's reaction when she sees those pictures." Camera 1 close-up on her face. Judge Judy studied the photographs with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen thousands of similar cases, her eyes moving from image to image, her expression darkening incrementally with each new piece of evidence. She lingered on one particular photo, a fist-sized hole in the drywall that went clear through to the wooden studs behind it. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that regular viewers of her show would recognize immediately as the first warning sign of impending judicial fury. She looked up slowly, her gaze locking onto Brianna with laser precision. "Ms. Matthews, you left the apartment looking like this?" Brianna shrugged, an actual visible shoulder-raising shrug captured perfectly by camera 2. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive, it seemed to happen in slow motion. "It wasn't that bad when I left," she said, her tone flat and bored, as if discussing something as mundane as yesterday's weather. Her eyes didn't even meet Judge Judy's. Instead, they wandered to the gallery, then to the cameras, anywhere but the bench. The first crack appeared in the courtroom's professional veneer, Judge Judy's eyes narrowed fractionally, the skin around them tightening in a way that made her look simultaneously younger and infinitely more dangerous. "Wasn't that bad?" she repeated, her voice taking on an edge sharp enough to cut glass. "There are fist-sized holes in the drywall, Ms. Matthews, multiple holes. That's not wear and tear. That's destruction." Brianna shifted her weight from one foot to the other, examining her fingernails with the kind of attention usually reserved for priceless artwork. "I mean, the place was already kinda run down when I moved in," she said, drawing out the word kinda with teenage inflection. "He's probably exaggerating to get more money out of me." Gasps rippled through the gallery, soft at first but audible, the sound spreading from the front rows to the back like a wave gaining momentum. Reporters underlined kinda run down in their notes, some circling it twice, others adding exclamation points in the margins. The plaintiff, Marcus Chen, stiffened visibly, his jaw muscles clenching, his hands gripping the edges of his folder until his knuckles turned white. Bird's eyebrow raised a millimeter, barely noticeable to the casual observer but caught by Camera 3's roaming lens. In the production booth, a producer leaned closer to her monitor, whispering to her assistant, "She's digging her own grave and doesn't even know it." Judge Judy set the photographs down on the bench slowly, deliberately, arranging them in a neat line as if creating a visual timeline of destruction. Each movement was controlled, precise, the physical embodiment of judicial patience stretched thin. "Ms. Matthews," she said, her voice dropping to a lower register that somehow carried more authority than shouting ever could. "When you rented this apartment, did you sign a lease agreement?" "Yes, sir," Brianna said, the word coming out as a single syllable of pure indifference. "Yeah?" Judge Judy repeated, her tone shifting from inquiry to something far more dangerous. The single word hung in the air between them like a challenge. "Is that how you address the court?" Brianna blinked, finally looking directly at the bench for the first time since sitting down. Her expression registered confusion, as if she genuinely didn't understand why her casual response was problematic. Yes?" "Yes, what?" Judge Judy's words were surgical, each syllable sharp and precise, cutting through Brianna's facade of indifference with the efficiency of a scalpel through tissue. The courtroom fell into heavy silence, the kind that amplifies every breath, every rustle of fabric, every barely audible whisper. Camera 3 panned slowly across the gallery, capturing faces frozen in anticipation, mouths slightly open, eyes wide, everyone sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded the storm. The production booth went completely silent, every crew member's attention locked on the monitors showing the tightening standoff. Reporters in the back row leaned forward in their seats, pens poised above notepads, circling phrases like confrontational tone and defendant challenges judge with emphasis that would translate into headlines within the hour. The anchors positioned at side desks exchanged urgent glances, one muttering off microphone, his voice barely audible but caught by the overhead boom. "She's about to cross a line she can't uncross." Brianna hesitated for the briefest moment, her brain finally registering that perhaps her approach wasn't working as planned. Her hands tightened slightly on the edges of the podium, knuckles flexing, a physical tell that her confidence was cracking around the edges. But instead of course-correcting, instead of reading the room and adjusting her strategy, she doubled down with the reckless abandon of someone who'd never faced real consequences before. She rolled her eyes, a gesture so overt, so brazenly disrespectful it seemed to happen in slow motion, her pupils traveling in a complete arc before settling back on Judge Judy with theatrical exasperation. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, the title dripping with sarcasm so thick you could cut it with a knife, her voice pitching into a mocking sing-song tone that transformed the words of respect into weapons of contempt. The gallery gasped collectively, the sound sharper this time, more shocked, reverberating off the wood-paneled walls like acoustic feedback. The intake of breath was so uniform, so synchronized it could have been choreographed. Reporters scribbled furiously, mocking tone, eye roll captured on camera, open disrespect, their handwriting deteriorating into barely legible scratches as they rushed to document the moment. Bird's hand moved subtly toward his belt, not threatening, just instinctive, a reflex born from years of managing courtroom disruptions and unpredictable litigants. His eyes never left Brianna, tracking her movements with the vigilance of a Secret Service agent scanning for threats. Camera operators tightened their shots immediately, zooming in on Brianna's face to capture every micro-expression, every flicker of defiant satisfaction that played across her features. The production director's voice came through the headset sharp and urgent. "Hold on her. Don't cut away. We need this." Camera 2's operator adjusted focus minutely, ensuring that every detail of Brianna's expression was crystal clear for the millions who would watch this moment repeatedly on social media. Dissecting it frame by frame, Judge Judy placed both hands flat on the bench in front of her, her palms pressing against the polished wood with controlled force. Her posture shifted visibly, spine straightening, shoulders squaring, her entire physical presence expanding to fill the space. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. She'd moved from judicial inquiry mode into absolute authority mode. The version of herself that had made hardened criminals in family court think twice about their life choices. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Let me make something crystal clear to you. Ms. Matthews," Judge Judy began, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the studio with perfect clarity, each word enunciated with the precision of someone who understood the power of language. "This is not your living room. This is not a social media comment section. This is not a joke you can laugh off with your friends later. This is a court of law, and I am the judge presiding over it. When you address me, you do so with respect. Genuine respect, not the performance you just gave." "Am I understood?" Brianna's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, a hairline crack appearing in her armor of arrogance. Her eyes darted briefly to the gallery, perhaps seeking allies or support, finding instead rows of faces staring back with expressions ranging from shock to secondhand embarrassment. The courtroom audience had stopped being neutral observers and had become invested witnesses to a train wreck unfolding in real time. But arrogance, once committed to, is hard to abandon without admitting error, and Brianna clearly wasn't ready for that kind of self-awareness. She tilted her head to one side, her expression shifting into faux innocence that wouldn't have convinced a kindergarten teacher. "I said Your Honor, didn't I?" The words came out with just enough edge to make clear she was still testing boundaries, still pushing, still convinced she could somehow win this confrontation through sheer audacity. The statement hung in the air like a lit match near gasoline. The gallery erupted in whispers, urgent, scandalized murmurs that rippled through the rows like wildfire spreading through dry grass. The sound grew louder, building into a low roar of disbelief that forced the bailiff to raise his hand in a calming gesture, his expression still neutral, but his eyes flashing a warning. "Order," Byrd said quietly, his voice somehow cutting through the noise without volume, just authority. The whispers died down to barely audible murmurs, but the energy remained, crackling in the air like static electricity before a lightning strike. Reporters scribbled with renewed frenzy, their notepads filling with phrases like, "Defendant openly mocks judge," "Confrontation reaching critical point," and "Defiance on live television." Each word underlined multiple times, some circled with arrows pointing to margins filled with additional commentary. One legal correspondent in the third row was already typing on his phone with his thumb, drafting a tweet that would go live the moment the episode aired. "Watching defendant commit professional suicide in Judge Judy's courtroom. This won't end well." In the production booth, the director leaned so far forward her nose nearly touched the monitor array, her breath fogging the glass slightly. She whispered into her headset, voice tight with the recognition that they were witnessing television gold, the kind of moment that would be clipped, shared, memed, and discussed for years. "Stay on, Judy. Whatever happens next, do not cut away. I don't care if the building catches fire, we stay on this shot." Marcus Chen, the plaintiff, stood frozen at his podium, his eyes darting between Brianna and Judge Judy like a spectator at a tennis match. Except this wasn't a game, this was a demolition in progress. His expression mixed vindication with genuine concern, as if he was simultaneously grateful that Brianna was proving his case about her character, while also worried that he might somehow get caught in the blast radius of whatever explosion was coming. "Judge." Judy removed her glasses with agonizing slowness, each movement deliberate and measured, the kind of theatrical precision that comes from decades of understanding human psychology. She folded them with meticulous care, the metal hinges clicking softly in the sudden silence, and set them on the bench directly in front of her. The gesture was simple, but it carried profound meaning to anyone who'd watched her show before. This was the signal that patience had expired, that the educational portion of the program was about to begin. "Ms. Matthews," she said, her voice now completely devoid of warmth, stripped down to pure judicial authority. "Do you think mocking me is going to help your case?" Brianna, emboldened by her own recklessness, by the false confidence that comes from never having truly faced consequences, shrugged again, the third time in less than 5 minutes. "I'm just saying what you want to hear, Your Honor." She drew out the last two words again, elongating them theatrically, her tone dripping with the kind of sarcasm that teenagers use when forced to apologize for things they're not sorry about. Gasps detonated across the courtroom like a string of firecrackers, the sound sharp and involuntary, reverberating off every surface. The reaction was louder this time, more visceral, spectators physically recoiling in their seats as if Brianna had just slapped someone. Several audience members covered their mouths with their hands, eyes wide with shock. One woman in the front row actually whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough for the microphones to pick up. her voice trembling with second-hand embarrassment. Camera 3 captured it all. The wave of shocked faces, the shaking heads, the expressions that ranged from disbelief to outright horror. Reporters' pens flew across pages, some abandoning coherent notes entirely in favor of shorthand symbols and exclamation points. The press section buzzed with barely suppressed activity, phones lighting up as journalists sent messages to their editors. "You need to see this episode. Trust me." Byrd's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes tracked Brianna with laser focus, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly into a ready stance, the subtle body language of someone prepared to intervene if verbal confrontation escalated into something more. His decades of courtroom experience had taught him to recognize the moment when a situation could tip from theatrical to dangerous. And while this hadn't crossed that threshold yet, it was approaching the edge. Judge Judy stood. The simple act of rising from her chair transformed the entire dynamic of the courtroom. She wasn't tall, barely 5 feet 1 inch in her judicial robes, but her presence expanded to fill the space like a physical force, like gravity intensifying until everyone felt the weight pressing down on them. The cameras scrambled slightly to adjust angles, operators pivoting their equipment to capture her full standing height, framing her against the American flag and California seal behind her. When Judge Judy descended from the bench, a rare move that production teams would later flag in their notes as unprecedented in recent episodes, the entire courtroom seemed to contract, the walls closing in as she walked slowly, deliberately toward Brianna's podium. Each footstep echoed in the absolute silence that had fallen over the studio, the sound of her sensible court shoes against the polished floor marking time like a countdown to detonation. Camera operators scrambled to track her movement, their equipment pivoting smoothly on professional tripods, lenses adjusting focus as she crossed the space between judicial authority and defiant defendant. The production director abandoned whispering entirely, her voice coming through headsets in urgent staccato bursts. "Follow her. Get the defendant's face. Split screen if you can. This is gold, absolute gold." Brianna's smirk evaporated like water on a hot skillet, her arms uncrossed involuntarily, dropping to her sides as her body language shifted from manufactured defiance to genuine unease. She took a half step backward, her back pressing against the podium behind her as if the wooden structure could provide protection from what was coming. Her eyes darted desperately to the gallery, seeking allies in the sea of faces, finding instead rows of spectators leaning forward with expressions that ranged from anticipation to grim satisfaction. No one was coming to her rescue. She was alone on an island of her own making. Judge Judy stopped 3 feet from Brianna's podium, close enough to be intimate, far enough to maintain judicial propriety. She folded her hands in front of her, the gesture almost conversational, as if they were simply two people having a discussion rather than judge and defendant in a legal proceeding being broadcast to millions. "Let me tell you what I want to hear," Judge Judy said, her tone deceptively mild, the calm before the hurricane. "I want to hear accountability. I want to hear responsibility. I want to hear someone who understands that actions have consequences, and that a lease agreement is a binding legal contract, not a suggestion you can ignore when it becomes inconvenient." She paused, letting the words settle like sediment in water. "What I don't want to hear is a 26-year-old child who thinks sarcasm is a substitute for a defense strategy and that eye-rolling is an acceptable response to legitimate questions about property. Destruction." Gasps rippled through the courtroom again, softer this time but pervasive, spreading through the gallery like wind through wheat fields. Reporters underlined 26-year-old child in their notepads with multiple emphatic strokes, some adding stars in the margins, others drawing arrows to connect the phrase with earlier quotes. Marcus Chen, still frozen at his podium, allowed himself the smallest smile of vindication, a barely perceptible upturn at the corners of his mouth quickly suppressed but captured perfectly by camera one's roaming lens. The audience members in the front rows exchanged knowing glances, nodding slightly to each other with expressions that said they'd seen this coming from the moment Brianna walked in, wearing ripped jeans and attitude. Several spectators had their phones out despite pre-show instructions to keep them silenced and hidden, unable to resist capturing even a few seconds of this confrontation for their own social media feeds later. Brianna opened her mouth to respond, her lips parting, vocal cords preparing to form words that would likely dig her hole even deeper. But Judge Judy raised a single finger, just one, index finger extended while the others remained folded against her palm. A gesture so commanding, so absolute in its authority, that it stopped the words before they could emerge. The power of that single raised finger was remarkable, freezing Brianna mid-breath like a pause button pressed on reality itself. "I'm not finished," Judge Judy said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. She turned, walking back toward the bench with the same measured pace, her robe swaying gently with each step. She ascended the steps to her elevated position, reclaiming her throne of judgment, and settled into her chair with the satisfied posture of someone who had complete control of the narrative, and everyone in the room knew it. She picked up her glasses, unfolding them with the same deliberate slowness she'd used to remove them, and placed them on her nose, adjusting them minutely until they sat perfectly. Then she lifted the case file, flipping through pages with exaggerated leisure, reading passages that everyone knew she'd already memorized, letting the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable, a psychological technique perfected over thousands of cases. The courtroom waited. Spectators held their breath unconsciously. Reporters' pens hovered above paper, frozen mid-word. Camera 3 captured the audience. A tableau of suspended animation, every face turned toward the bench, every eye locked on Judge Judy's expressionless face as she read. The segment clock on the production booth wall ticked past 14 minutes, far longer than most cases ran, but nobody was calling cut. This was the kind of television that justified entire seasons, the moment that would be featured in promotional materials and best of compilations for years to come. Finally, after what felt like an eternity compressed into 30 seconds, Judge Judy looked up over the rim of her glasses, her gaze settling on Brianna with the precision of a targeting laser. "Ms. Matthews," Judge Judy began, her voice carrying the finality of a closing argument that had already won. "You owe Mr. Chen $2,400 in unpaid rent. That's not in dispute. Your lease agreement, which you signed willingly, confirms it. The question before this court was whether you also owe him $600 in damages. You claimed the apartment was run down when you moved in, that Mr. Chen is exaggerating to extract money from you." She paused, flipping to a specific page in the case file with practiced precision. "But you have no evidence to support that claim. No photographs from your move-in date. No emails documenting pre-existing damage. No witnesses who can corroborate your story. You have nothing but your word. The same word you've been using to mock this court for the past 15 minutes. The gallery murmured, a low rumble of agreement that Byrd didn't bother to quiet, because Judge Judy was building towards something, and interrupting that momentum would be like stopping a freight train mid-journey. Reporters scribbled no evidence to support claims with emphasis, their notepads filling rapidly with quotations and observations that would become articles and blog posts within hours of the episode airing. Judge Judy continued, her voice gaining strength and authority with each sentence. Mr. Chen, on the other hand, has photographs from your move-in inspection showing pristine walls and clean carpets. He has documentation of every communication with you about the lease terms. He has repair estimates from contractors detailing the cost of fixing the damage you left behind. She set the folder down with a soft thud that somehow sounded like a gavel strike. In short, Ms. Matthews, he came prepared. You came with attitude, and in my courtroom, preparation beats attitude every single time. Brianna's face had gone pale, the color draining from her cheeks like water circling a drain. Her hands gripped the podium so tightly her knuckles had turned bone white, her fingernails pressing into the wood hard enough to leave small indentations. Her earlier smirk had vanished completely, replaced by an expression of dawning horror as she finally understood that this wasn't going her way, that her strategy of deflection and sarcasm had backfired spectacularly. But before we get to the damages, Judge Judy said, leaning forward slightly, her eyes locked on Brianna's with unbreakable intensity. Let's address your behavior in this courtroom. You walked in here treating this proceeding like it was a joke, like appearing before a judge was some kind of inconvenience you had to tolerate. You rolled your eyes. You mocked me directly. You showed complete and utter disrespect for this process, and for the legal system it represents. The words fell like hammer blows, each one landing with devastating accuracy. The gallery sat in rapt silence, barely breathing, every spectator leaning forward in their seats as if physically pulled toward the bench by the gravity of the moment. Camera 2 remained locked on Brianna's face, capturing every micro-expression, the trembling lower lip, the eyes beginning to glisten with unshed tears, the jaw clenching and unclenching as she fought to maintain some shred of composure. Judge Judy's voice dropped to a quieter register, but somehow it carried even more weight than before. In most courtrooms, Ms. Matthews, that kind of conduct would result in contempt charges. You could be fined. You could be jailed. But I'm not going to hold you in contempt today. Do you know why? Brianna shook her head mutely, her voice apparently having abandoned her entirely in the face of judicial reckoning. Because the judgment you're about to receive is punishment enough, Judge Judy said, each word crisp and final. You came here thinking you could charm or mock your way out of accountability. Instead, you're leaving $3,000 poorer, and with a lesson that will follow you for the rest of your life. She picked up her gavel, holding it suspended in the air for a moment that stretched into infinity. Judgment for the plaintiff in the full amount of $3,000, Ms. Matthews. You will pay Mr. Chen $2,400 in unpaid rent and $600 in property damages plus court costs. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire studio, reverberating off walls and ceiling, a sound of absolute finality. The gallery erupted, not in gasps this time, but in spontaneous applause that started in the back rows and swept forward like a wave, building in volume and intensity until it filled the courtroom with the sound of collective satisfaction. Reporters scribbled full judgment for plaintiff in all caps, underlining it multiple times, some adding exclamation points, others drawing boxes around the phrase to emphasize its significance. Marcus Chen exhaled visibly, his shoulders sagging with relief, his hands releasing their death grip on his folder as vindication washed over him in a visible wave. Camera 1 captured his reaction, the smile breaking across his face, the way his eyes closed briefly as if offering a silent prayer of gratitude, then swiveled back to Brianna, whose expression had crumbled entirely. Her face was a mask of shock and humiliation, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, her makeup beginning to run in dark streaks that the harsh studio lights made impossible to hide. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. She raised her hand, silencing the applause instantly, the room falling quiet so fast it was as if someone had pressed a mute button on reality itself. "We're not done," she said. And those 3 words sent a collective shiver through the courtroom because everyone understood that somehow, impossibly, this was about to get worse for Brianna. Judge Judy leaned forward, her hands folded on the bench, her expression serious and implacable. "Ms. Matthews, I want you to understand something. This judgment isn't just about money. It's about the choices you made, choosing to break your lease without proper notice, choosing to damage property that wasn't yours, choosing to come into this courtroom with disrespect instead of accountability." She paused, letting each word settle like stones in water. "Those choices have consequences, and the consequence you face today is this. Disrespect has consequences, and in my courtroom, they're immediate." The line, the exact same one from the cold open that started this entire story, landed like a bomb. Gasps exploded across the gallery, louder and more unified than any that had come before. Reporters circled the quote in their notepads with multiple rings, drawing stars and arrows, already mentally drafting headlines. Judge Judy delivers devastating verdict. Defendant mocks judge. Pays $3,000 price. Instant justice, Judge Judy destroys disrespectful litigant. The production booth erupted in silent celebration, crew members exchanging fist bumps and triumphant gestures, the director pumping her fist with the satisfaction of someone who knew they'd just captured television lightning in a bottle. This would trend. This would go viral. This would be the clip everyone shared for weeks, months, maybe years. Brianna stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her earlier arrogance shattered so completely it was as if it had never existed. Camera 2 captured every devastating detail, the tears streaming down her face, the trembling hands, the dawning comprehension of just how badly she'd miscalculated. Judge Judy banged her gavel one final time. Judgment for the plaintiff. We're adjourned. She rose from the bench, gathered her papers with efficient movements, and exited through the side door without a backward glance, leaving the courtroom in stunned, electric silence. So there you have it. The moment Brianna Matthews mocked Judge Judy and paid a $3,000 price for disrespect. A courtroom lesson in accountability that millions watched unfold in real time. If this story hit differently, if it reminded you that actions have consequences and respect matters, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button. We bring you the most compelling real-life stories of justice, karma, and lessons learned the hard way. Smash that bell icon so you never miss another episode of Instant Accountability. And here's my final question for you. What's the most satisfying moment of instant justice you've ever witnessed? Courtroom, workplace, everyday life, I want to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. The best ones might be featured in future videos. Thank you for watching. Remember, respect isn't optional and accountability is inevitable. Until next time, stay humble, stay honest, and always show up prepared.